Israel bombs the southern suburb of Beirut, the first airstrike on the Lebanese capital since November's ceasefire. Hours earlier, rockets were fired at Israel from southern Lebanon. After numerous ceasefire breaches by Israel in 4 months, how serious is this one? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Cyril Vanier. Wailing sirens once again fill the air in Beirut after the first Israeli attack on the Lebanese capital since November's ceasefire. The strike came just hours after rockets were fired at Israel from southern Lebanon, Hezbollah denying any involvement. A nation once again on edge after months of conflict last year killed 4,000 people. The 4-month-old ceasefire has been fragile, to say the least. More than 1,250 Israeli violations and at least 100 people killed, say the Lebanese authorities. Speaking after Friday's attack, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that his forces would, in his words, continue to enforce the ceasefire with force and strike any threat to the state of Israel. And despite international condemnation of the Israeli action, the U.S. has given its backing. So what's next for Lebanon and its fledgling government? And what is Israel's strategy? We'll get to our guests in a moment. First, though, this report from Laura Khan.
A large column of smoke billows above Beirut's southern suburb, and more destruction in the densely populated neighbourhood after an Israeli airstrike on Friday shattered months of calm and sent thousands of people scattering for safety in the Lebanese capital. Mohammed Zabara was among them. When he returned to collect more belongings, he found chunks had been ripped from his home. It was near what Israel claimed was a drone storage facility before bombing and destroying a multi-storey building.
Why would they hit unarmed people? Are there drones here? Where are the drones? Why hasn't everything exploded when they hit? It's proof that the enemy is lying.
Earlier on Friday, Israel said it had intercepted one of 2 rockets coming from southern Lebanon for the second time in 1 week, although Hezbollah denies involvement. The escalation is putting pressure on the Lebanese government. Prime Minister Nawaf Salam has promised to disarm non-state armed groups and maintain November's ceasefire deal. The bombing happened while President Joseph Aoun was in Paris for economic talks.
Unfortunately, we received news about the south and Beirut, and the return of escalation and tension, and the return of Israeli aggression on our country and near our capital. It's obvious that we declare our strong condemnation of this, and reject any attack on Lebanon or any suspicious, malicious attempt to return Lebanon to the cycle of violence.
French President Emmanuel Macron says the attack was a departure from the approved ceasefire deal.
I will call President Trump and discuss the issue with him. The minister will do the same with his counterpart, and I will have the opportunity within the next 48 hours to hold an in-depth discussion on this matter with the Israeli Prime Minister. But today's situation is unacceptable. It does not comply with the framework we have defined.
But the US State Department seems to back Israel's attack.
Israel is defending its people and interests by responding to rocket attacks from terrorists in Lebanon.
For now, the fragile deal remains in place, but Israel continues to occupy some Lebanese territory and has breached the deal hundreds of times, while Hezbollah has claimed one breach. While in Beirut and across the country, thousands of people have been left homeless and communities fear a possible return to the conflict. Laura Khan, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
So let's bring in our guests. In Beirut, Rizk, a security affairs analyst. In Rome, Lorenzo Kamel, associate professor of international history at the University of Turin. And also in Beirut, Sami Nader, director at the Levant Institute for Strategic Affairs. A warm welcome to all of you. Sami, when you saw the footage on Friday, flattened building, smoke, sirens, what was your first thought?
It was a big concern, not to say fear, that the war can resume at any moment. because this was the reminiscence of what we went through for the whole year, especially the last 4 months of the war, that has been very devastating on the country, its people. It led to more than 1 million migrants inside the country, a huge number of dead, and practically whole areas that have been devastated, destructed, and up to now, no effort has been done to reconstruction. And it came at a very wrong time for Lebanon, where it was going through a deep and unprecedented economic crisis. So when we saw this, it was a kind of alarm. It spread the fear among the population that the nightmare could return.
Ali, you're a security affairs analyst. Israel says that this strike was in response to Hezbollah rocket fire. But Hezbollah say that it's not them, that if they had fired at Israel, they would claim responsibility as they usually do. And the Lebanese president, who was in France, said that, quote, Hezbollah, all indications are that Hezbollah is not responsible for that rocket fire. So where does that leave us? And if it's not Hezbollah who fired those rockets at Israel, then who would it be?
That's a very good question. By the way, the French President Emmanuel Macron also echoed Lebanese President Joseph Aoun's statements saying that it was unlikely or that Hezbollah was not behind these rocket attacks. Hezbollah doesn't operate in this way, by the way. This was a very amateur kind of an attack, a beginner. This is what we call beginner's work. And so it's very, very far-fetched that Hezbollah would carry out this operation. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, Hezbollah also doesn't have an interest to launch such an attack, which would not only be ineffective or isn't only effective, but it also gives the Israelis a pretext to further escalate the situation. So if you look at the situation from various different directions, one can easily reach the conclusion that this was not Hezbollah. Hezbollah has stated that it remains committed to the ceasefire. Hezbollah is in a state of repairing itself. That's a very important point. Now, when you're in the state of repairing yourself after the very heavy blows it was dealt in the previous war or during that September to November period of escalation, that also hence makes little sense for Hezbollah to escalate. So it's clear that the Israelis are looking for a certain pretext to escalate the situation. Hezbollah does not want to give them that pretext. And that leads me to the conclusion that there is some kind of suspicious party behind the launching of these missiles. Now it's occurred on 2 occasions. People from Hezbollah who
explain
I spoke
that,
to,
suspicious party, explain that.
I was just going to. People from Hezbollah who I speak to, they say, for example, that certain Israeli allies in Lebanon are behind that. Now, who the Israelis' allies are, we're not sure. But definitely, Hezbollah, the Lebanese state, they have no interest in what is taking place. Before October 7, similar incidents did take place, like these kinds of amateur rocket attacks. Now, previously, groups affiliated with Al-Qaeda were the ones who were blamed for these kinds of operations. I wouldn't be surprised if that also is the case right now. Some kind of possibly Salafi jihadi affiliates or Al-Qaeda affiliates who do have a history, by the way, of collaborating with the Israelis. The Israelis have said on more than one occasion that they much prefer the Al-Qaeda Salafi jihadi brand than those who are allied with Iran. Of course, Hezbollah is in that category of being allies with or an ally with Iran. So that is one possibility, that possibly Salafi jihadis are involved. Or some
Ali,
other
pause there for a second. In this scenario that you're explaining, which is just a scenario, we have no evidence, no proof for it, you're saying that an Al-Qaeda-affiliated group would have fired rockets at Israel with Israel's blessing in order to give them an excuse to strike at Hezbollah?
I didn't say that it was with Israel's blessing. It might be with Israel's blessing. It might not be. You have to remember that Al-Qaeda or Salafi jihadis, they're also enemies of Hezbollah. And I think that what the common trait between Israel and these Salafi jihadis, despite the fact that they express their animosity towards each other out in the open, but I think that practically speaking, they do share a sheer hostility towards Hezbollah and towards Iran and its allies more broadly, even towards Hamas, I would argue. So again, that is a possibility. Israel might have known about it. It might not have. But I think that it's far-fetched to think that Israel wouldn't know, because in the previous round of escalation with Hezbollah, Israel was able to know exactly where Hezbollah was, where the missiles, they generally had all this information. And that's not surprising given Israel's technological superiority. So I'm sure that the Israelis knew about it. Now, if the other party is actively cooperating, collaborating, I'm not sure. But what is clear is that what happened is being used as a pretext by the Israeli side. And there are some parties in Lebanon who feel it in their interests for Israel to escalate against Hezbollah and also by extension against Lebanon itself. What we saw yesterday was an escalation first and foremost focus on Hezbollah, given that they targeted the southern suburbs of Beirut known as Dahiya.
Lorenzo, what do you think of all this?
Yes, my impression is that beyond sentences and claims, it's clear that Hezbollah's deterrent posture has weakened, and Israeli authorities want to seize the moment to impose once and for good their regional order and also new rules of engagement. And they understand that this is the moment to seize this opportunity, also in consideration of the Trump administration and so on. That said, as you were mentioning, since the beginning of the truth in November 27, so the raids that were carried out by Israeli authorities killed over 110 Lebanese. So that said, so let's say it's difficult to use the word truth when you have this kind of numbers. Looking to that from a broader perspective, we know that there are data that have been collected. So according, for instance, to air pressure, documented that between 2007 and 2022, there were 22,000 violations of the Lebanese airspace by the Israeli forces. We know that according to data that have been provided by a U.S. NGO, whose name is Armed Conflict Location, we know that between October 2023 and September 2024, so in a matter of 12 months, we know that the Israeli forces were striking Lebanon 5 times for each assault from the Hezbollah side. So 5-1, that was the ratio. So once again, looking all of that from a long-term perspective, we see that so the claims are there. We can expect these different claims from different angles, but then certainly we know that from a Lebanese perspective, and we are hearing some scholars from Lebanon, certainly all that should be assessed from a broader perspective.
Sami, there was supposed to be an oversight committee for the ceasefire. When the ceasefire deal was struck in November, there was an agreement for there to be a committee, which the patrons of the committee, if you will, are the U.S. and France. They're also the patrons of the ceasefire. And the way this was supposed to work, at least we were told at the time, is this committee would assess any violations of the ceasefire to answer basic questions like, was it a violation? If so, who was behind it? Exactly the kind of questions that we're asking today. And yet I'm not hearing anything about this committee. They're not giving any input here. And the Lebanese government, after 2 salvos of rockets being fired at Israel, still does not know who's behind it.
Definitely, because today the ball is in the camp of this committee and on the camp of the Lebanese authority. This committee has been led by the United States of America with the presence of France. We have heard the statement of the French president yesterday saying that this is unacceptable. Yes, but what the way out of this continuous crisis? One has to mention that since day one, this is not new. Since day one, this ceasefire has been very fragile. Since day one, both parties did not comply with this ceasefire agreement. Neither Hezbollah was fully demilitarized according to the 1701 UN resolution, which is the basis of this agreement, nor Israel withdrew from Lebanon. It kept like 5 outposts inside the Lebanese territory, feeding the narrative of Hezbollah that the country is still occupied and they need to wage the activity to liberate this territory. So both parties are not complying with the agreement. But what happened yesterday, on Friday and yesterday, these missiles that were fired, they were fired from north of Litani. So this is an area that is not controlled, or it's not under the framework of the 1701 agreement that is that focuses on south of the Litani. But it put on the table the necessary implementation of another UN resolution, which is the 1559, that calls for the dismantling and of all military organization, including Hezbollah and all possible other actors that could have waged this military operation yesterday. So the way out of this is very simple, is to give all the support to the Lebanese army to take difficult decision, including disarming Hezbollah in implementation of 1559, but all other military organization, and to have the state having the full control and the sole control of security on its territory.
Well, so Ali, this is one of the main, I think it's fair to say, one of the main challenges, if not the biggest challenge for this new Lebanese leadership, right? New president, new prime minister, is to assert political and military control over the entire country, including southern Lebanon, which is really known as Hezbollah territory, or has been perceived as such, has been such for a long time. The Lebanese president says that there have been 250 operations to seize weapons in tunnels south of the Litani River. Now, as Sami was telling us, reminding us, the ceasefire says that there should be no Hezbollah weapons and no Hezbollah military assets south of the Litani River. And yet 250 operations have seized weapons in an area where they shouldn't even be. What does that tell you?
First of all, with all due respect to Sami, making this comparison or trying to say that both sides are not complying or putting Hezbollah as an equal on equal footing with Israel. In other words, saying that Israel isn't complying, Hezbollah isn't complying. The violations from the Israeli side are huge compared to the violations from Hezbollah or from the Lebanese side. So there's no comparison to be made. Joseph Aoun, the Lebanese president, he did say that these kinds of issues, the disarmament of Hezbollah to the south of the Litani River, this is not a very easy, simple task. It's a task which takes time. Remember that this military infrastructure has been there since 2006, even before 2006. So it's only natural, I think, for this not to be a swift process, but rather to be a gradual process. And the Lebanese president has made no statements indicating that Hezbollah is not committing to the agreement. So again, I think that Hezbollah, for its own interests, is committing to this agreement. But as I said, this is a long, complicated process. Now, about your question regarding the ability to establish control, to establish Lebanese sovereignty, there's one important point we have to keep in mind, that for the Lebanese state to have sovereignty, the Israelis are violating the sovereignty. Now, the question is, who's going to put a stop to the Israeli violations of Lebanese sovereignty? Can we rely on the Trump administration, which appears to be even going beyond the Biden administration in providing full-fledged support? You showed in your report what Ortagos, the U.S. Deputy Middle East envoy, said when she laid the blame on the Lebanese side. And the Americans are always going to lay the blame on the Lebanese side, regardless of what actually happened. So I think that in the end, for the Lebanese state to be able to establish its sovereignty, you're going to have to witness a dramatic change in the US stance and the United States putting real pressure on the Israeli side. I don't see that happening. And this strengthens the logic or the argument of Hezbollah by saying that in the end, as a result of everything I just explained, the absolute necessity or the only way to deal with the situation is for there to be an armed resistance represented by Hezbollah. Another quick point, is the United States willing to provide the Lebanese army with military equipment, real military weapons, able to deter Israel and any other enemy? Again, the answer to that, or to answer to all these questions, is no. So absent a dramatic revolution in US foreign policy, I think that the situation is leading or is heading towards more danger. The situation is going to become even more difficult, more dangerous, and that in the end, I think, is going to work to the advantage of Hezbollah, which has always said time and again that the only way to deal with such threats and with such dangers is to build an armed resistance.
Lorenzo, is Israel weakening, undermining, crippling perhaps the fledgling Lebanese government when it strikes the capital? Or, counter-argument, is Israel perhaps doing it a favor? That logic would say that as Hezbollah is weakened, that gives more room to this new government to assert control politically and militarily over the entire country.
Yes, I don't have a final answer to your question, but I know that certainly the fact of having armed forces outside of the state, that is, of course, that happened after the end of the civil war in 1990 in Lebanon, is certainly a source of weakness for a state. But at the same time, we know that Hezbollah did not come from Mars. We know that, like Hamas did not come from Mars. The occupation of the Gaza Strip started in 20 years earlier, and then Hamas was founded in 1987. Same applies to Hezbollah. So it was, Southern Lebanon was occupied, started from 1978, and then after 4 years, we know that Hezbollah was there. So once again, once that we know all this background, we realize that certainly there are major issues because many of our countries, lack of accountability, weak governance, corruption. So all these elements are there, and we should take also into account that for local, let's say, internal responsibilities. But at the same time, if you look this from a broader perspective, once again, what comes to my mind are the words that were said once by a former Israeli general in 2015 to Michael Oren, that was at the time the Israeli ambassador to the United States. I remember that he said, why won't Americans face the truth? To defend Western freedom, they must preserve Middle Eastern tyranny. This is the mindset. This is the mindset that is often used from Western countries. Of course, I don't want to generalize, but many Western countries, many Western politicians, the idea that we must preserve this tyranny, we must preserve this kind of attitude, because this is useful for us in order to keep going with our affairs and so on, and to preserve, of course, our interests in the region. So once again, I don't know exactly if this is made on purpose in order to weaken this government or not, but I know for sure that this attempt to keep very weak this country and divided rule and so on. So this is very much part of the policy that we see here.
Sami, is this the most emboldened that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been since October the 7th? I ask you this because, you know, his biggest political vulnerability, which was passing a budget, that's now behind him. He's done it. His coalition got bigger and stronger with Ben Gvir back in the government. He has replaced a number of key people, the Army Chief of Staff, the Minister of Defense, with people who are more loyal to him and more aligned with his views. And also, he's got nothing to lose. The country, Israel, is already on trial for genocide, and he personally is wanted by the ICC for crimes against humanity. If you connect all those dots, is this the most emboldened that he's been since October 7th?
In a way, yes, but definitely Netanyahu's bet is to continue the war at least on two fronts, the front of Hezbollah and the front of Hamas. The question is, should the Lebanese counterpart or the Palestinian counterpart facilitate this task. Definitely for domestic reason, what Netanyahu is trying to do for the least kicking the can down the road, or having a plan to redesign the whole Levant, not to say the whole Middle East, in a way that favors Israel security. Up to now, though, when it comes to Lebanon, Israel's objective, which is to secure the return of the resident of the Galilee, has not been achieved. This is why he's keen to continue pressuring Hezbollah and to pressuring as well the new Lebanese authority to disarm Hezbollah. So the point is where the Lebanon interest lies. Is it into through facilitating the task of Netanyahu? There is other, stakeholder trying to push Lebanon for a normalization with Israel. Not long ago, Mr. Witkoff said at one point Syria and Lebanon should join the Abraham Accord. No one in Lebanon wants this normalization to happen. This is why the best framework to manage the relationship between Lebanon and Israel is the Armistice Accord that has been signed and agreed in 1949, and the full implementation of UN resolution, mainly 1559, 1680, and 1701. This would serve as a framework that would prevent to drag Lebanon into a wider conflict, because the big elephant in the room today is what will happen with Iran. Iran has been sent a letter by Trump. It looks like they answered yesterday, but no indicator that a military option is out of the table. We all hope that they will reach a diplomatic solution. However, this conflict is impacting other important arena, mainly what's happening in Gaza and what's happening in southern Lebanon.
Gentlemen, that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank all our guests for joining us, Ali, Rizk, Lorenzo, Kamel, and Sami, Nader. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X, our handle there, @AJ Inside Story. From me, Cyril Vanier, and the entire team here in Doha, bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.